This is the panel on women and work. And I'm going to be your moderator for this panel. We have some very excellent speakers this afternoon. It's very important to be discussing the issue of women at work, especially in the context of the globalized world and what's happening to work generally around the world, and how what's happening to women in the context of this general downward spiral in working conditions and pay and the impact of globalization. As most of you probably know, one of the pillars of neoliberalism, in addition to things like privatization of public services and deregulation of financial institutions and other businesses and trade agreements which institutionalize corporate power, are two aspects that impact jobs. And one is, of course, the issue of deunionization of workplaces, which means that workplaces that used to have strong unions, the unions have been attacked, undermined, or thrown out, and other places where unions have not been able to, not gotten a foothold, the ability to actually form and join unions to protect interests has been seriously undermined through mass corporate campaigns against unions and a whole thriving union-busting industry. The second aspect of corporate globalization is, of course, casualization of the workforce, in which workers no longer have rights of tenure, rights to dismissal without just cause, rights to enough security to organize a union. They're on temporary contracts, they're hired through labor brokers, they sometimes don't know who their actual employer is. And this is clearly known as precarious work, and it's one of the norms now in the world. We have a great panel today to talk about international aspects of women at work, and I'm going to start with our colleagues who came from Algeria. We have Yasmine Bennamanii and Zouzou Zahida. Yasmine is a lawyer and has held the rights of audience before the Algerian court since 2007. She's trained in the chambers of the president of the Algerian Bar Association, from which she practiced for 5 years. At that time, she mainly practiced criminal law, but 3 years ago, she set up her own practice, and she returned to her first love, civil law. She is vice president of the First Association of Algerian Lawyers and is a member of IADL's Bureau, and we're very excited to have her. Zouzou Zahida studied law in Algiers and has been a lawyer since 2005, and since 2007 she's been a member of the Algiers Bar Association. She was elected Secretary General of the Algerian National Association of Women Lawyers in December of 2014, having been a member of the Liala Association of Women Lawyers of Algiers. And we're very lucky to have them and have both of them speak today, and please welcome them.
Merci. Tout d'abord, un grand remerciement à la société Handyside, puisqu'elle m'a accordé cette opportunité qui va être ma première expérience. Bon, notre travail se portera sur la femme au milieu du travail, et comme titre, nous avons choisi une égalité consacrée qui doit être renforcée.
I'd like to thank you very much, first off, for giving me this opportunity to speak. This is my first time speaking at a conference like this. Obviously, the topic today is going to be women in the workplace. and the title that we've given to this presentation is going to be Dedicated or Devoted Equality that has to be strengthened.
Les femmes algériennes, depuis l'indépendance, inspirent à l'instauration d'une égalité avec les hommes ainsi que l'exercice de leurs droits fondamentaux. Elles sont placées la question de lois discriminatoires à leur égard au cœur de leur combat et revendications. Donc,
Since independence, Algerian women have aspired to arriving at that point of establishment of equality with men and being able to exercise their fundamental rights. They consider that this issue of the discriminatory laws that currently exist against them is something that is at the heart of their struggles and their revendications up until now.
Dans ce sens, beaucoup de dispositions ont été insérées dans des textes législatifs et réglementaires pour favoriser l'égalité du travail entre les citoyens sans distinction fondée sur le sexe en matière d'accès au travail, au salaire et à l'avancement. Comme il sera précisé par la suite, ces textes de loi sont à l'avant-garde du vaste effort de mobilisation de la société en faveur d'une modification de certaines dispositions discriminatoires insérées depuis trop longtemps dans certaines lois. Le Code du travail est le seul texte en vigueur de la définition de la discrimination et les relations de travail sont égalitaires. Les travailleuses ne souffrent pas de discrimination en matière de salaire et bénéficient de la sécurité et la protection tout comme l'homme.
So, in this sense, many provisions have been included in the legislative and government texts that have come out and regulations to promote equality of treatment between citizens without carrying out any discrimination based on gender. Distinctions in these matters also related to employment, pay and promotion, as is going to be explained below. And these laws really are at the forefront of a huge effort and mobilisation in favour of certain provisions that have to be modified and included, and that have been included in the current laws for too long, in certain laws that is. And so the Labour Code is the only text that's currently in force which contains a definition of discrimination and where labour relations are equal in terms of wages. The female worker under them does not suffer any discrimination, that is in terms of salary, and enjoys the same security and protection as men.
La législation algérienne régissant les relations de travail prend sa source tout d'abord dans la Constitution 89 révisée en 96, laquelle comprend dans son article 29 le principe fondamental de l'égalité devant la loi de tous les citoyens sans que puisse prévaloir aucune discrimination. La consécration du principe de l'égalité de sexe au milieu du travail est exprimée dans plusieurs articles de la Constitution algérienne, tels que l'égalité et le droit des citoyens à la protection, à la sécurité et à l'hygiène dans le travail, au repos, à l'exercice du droit syndical et au droit de grève aussi.
So, Algerian legislation governing labour relations first came to be or originated in 1989 in the constitution that was then revised on November 28, 1996, which does enshrine in its Article 29, as previously stated, the fundamental principle of equality before the law for all citizens, and that they should suffer no discrimination. The consecration of the principle of gender equality in the workplace is expressed in several articles of the Constitution, as well as the rights of citizens to protection, safety, and health and safety conditions at work, and the right to rest, the right to take part in trade unionist activities, to be part of a trade union, and the right to be able to go on strike.
La femme salariée, et toute forme de salariée bien sûr, a le droit à une protection contre la discrimination autre que celle fondée sur l'aptitude et le mérite pour occuper un poste de travail. Aussi, d'après l'article de cette loi, toute disposition prévue au titre d'une convention ou d'un accord collectif ou d'un contrat de travail de nature à asseoir une discrimination quelconque entre travailleurs et travailleuses en matière d'emploi est nul et nullifé.
So, in this law, all female workers, just as their male counterparts already have, should be entitled to protection against discrimination other than that which is based solely on ability and merit when it comes to being considered for a job. Also, according to the same article, any provision of an agreement, whether it be a collective agreement or employment contract, that establishes any discrimination between male and female workers should be regarded from this point onwards as null and void.
La loi également contre la discrimination salariale et tout employeur est tenu d'assurer ses employeurs pour un travail de valeur égalitaire, pour un valeur égale, l'égalité de rémunération entre les travailleurs et les travailleuses. La législation du travail actuelle n'énumère aucun emploi auquel la femme ne peut accéder. Seuls les travaux souverainement humanisants sont interdits aux femmes enceintes et en période d'allaitement.
The law also provides protection against salary discrimination, and any employer is required to provide by law when it comes to work that's of equal value and it's exactly the same job basically being carried out by men and by women, equal pay for male and female workers. The current labour legislation does not list any employment to which women should not be able to hold, apart from, of course, the case of work involving ionising radiation, which, of course, cannot be undertaken by women who are pregnant or women who are breastfeeding.
Cependant, la loi interdit aussi à l'employeur de recourir aux femmes, quel que soit leur âge, pour effectuer des travaux de nuit entre 21h à 5h du matin, sauf dérogation spéciale délivrée par l'inspection du travail. Dans le cadre de la relation de travail, la femme salariée, au même titre que l'homme, a le droit au respect de son intégrité physique et morale et à sa dignité.
However, the law does forbid employing women of all ages, irrespective of whatever their age might be. That is, when it comes to night work, that is any work to be undertaken between the hours of 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. This is unless there is special exceptions to this that have to be granted by the Labour Inspectorate. As part of the employment relationship, the female employee is entitled to exactly the same as what the male employee would get, has the right to personal dignity and to maintain their physical and mental integrity.
Les femmes salariées bénéficient du congé de maternité durant la période pré- et postnatale indemnisée par l'organisme de sécurité sociale, ainsi les périodes d'absence pour maternité sont considérées comme période de travail. La suspension de la relation de travail intervient de droit au bénéfice de la femme salariée contrainte d'interrompre son travail pour cause de maternité. À l'issue de cette période de suspension de la relation de travail, la femme salariée est réintégrée de droit à son poste ou un poste de rémunération équivalente.
Working mothers who benefit from maternity leave during the pre- and postnatal periods are compensated in terms of payment by the Social Security body, and this also includes periods of absence due to maternity, and these should be counted as hours that have actually been worked. The suspension of any employment relationship shall be recorded in favour of the female employee if they are forced to stop working due to maternity reasons, and at the end of this period of suspension of the employment relationship, the female employee is entitled to return to the same post or to a similar job post paid at the same salary.
Aussi, le secteur public prévoit le droit à des postes d'allaitement durant une période d'une année à compter de la date d'expiration du congé de maternité. En matière de retraite, la femme jouit d'un avantage comme la fixation de l'âge de départ en retraite. En effet, l'article 6 fixe à 60 ans l'âge acquis pour les hommes et à 55 ans pour les femmes, qui bénéficient en outre d'une réduction d'1 an par enfant dans la limite de 3 ans.
Also, the public sector foresees in its provisions the right to provide women with breastfeeding breaks for a period of 1 year from the date that their maternity leave runs out. However, private sector workers are not covered by these provisions currently, and in the area of retirement, when it comes to retirement, women should enjoy the same benefits in terms of retirement age. In fact, Article 6 actually sets the age of retirement for men at 60 and 55 for women. Women should also benefit from a reduction of 1 year per child, the years that they have to work, and this is capped at 3 years.
Ainsi, la législation algérienne contient des dispositions favorables à la femme en matière de travail qui peuvent être assimilées à une forme de discrimination positive.
So we can therefore see that Algerian legislation does contain some specific provisions that actually work in favour of women in the workplace, which can also be perceived or thought of thereby as a form of positive discrimination.
Dans le cadre des réformes politiques et législatives, l'Algérie a ratifié beaucoup de conventions et de pactes dans le but de renforcer cette égalité entre hommes et femmes au milieu du travail. En ratifiant en 1996 la Convention sur l'élimination de toute forme de discrimination envers les femmes, l'Algérie s'est engagée à revoir toute sa législation qui était très empreinte d'inégalité. Elle a de ce fait initié aussi un processus de ratification des conventions internationales depuis 2004, notamment celles concernant les droits politiques des femmes. En effet, dans cette révision constitutionnelle de 2008, l'État ouvre à la promotion des droits politiques de la femme en augmentant ses chances de participer à la représentation dans les assemblées élues.
So, as part of political and legal reforms, various conventions have been ratified to strengthen the equality between men and women in the workplace. By ratifying in 1996 the Convention on the Suppression of all forms of discrimination against women, Algeria committed to a review of the legislation and administrative practice, and also of social inequality. And therefore, at the same time, Algeria initiated a process of ratification of international conventions in 2004, particularly conventions concerning women's political rights. And indeed, in the constitutional revision of 2008, the state encouraged the promotion of women's political rights by increasing their chances of access to representation in elected assemblies.
Et à l'occasion, l'Algérie avait présenté son deuxième rapport périodique au comité de la CIDO en 2005, dont le rapporteur avait annoncé qu'il y avait eu, en matière de travail et d'émancipation économique, le nombre de salariés avait considérablement accru. Je parle de salariés femmes, bien sûr, avait considérablement accru, y compris au milieu rural, même si le taux global était resté faible. Les femmes sont fortement représentées dans l'éducation, l'enseignement, la santé et même des travaux de justice et des travaux d'hommes, la gendarmerie et la police aussi.
So, occasionally, Algeria had submitted the second periodic report to the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women in 2005, and the reporter announced that in the field of labour and economic emancipation, the number of employed women had increased considerably, including also in rural areas, although the overall percentage remained low. The women are actually very present in some areas like teaching, education, medicine, and justice, but also in areas where men are usually more represented, like the police forces.
Et selon l'observation finale du comité, il salue la hausse de nombre de femmes dans le secteur judiciaire et qui a constaté aussi la participation de la femme dans la vie politique. Celle-ci s'est améliorée et il salue la présence de 4 femmes au poste de ministre au sein du gouvernement algérien. Aussi, des modifications significatives du Code de la famille, Code pénal, Code de nationalité et de la Constitution.
So according to the conclusion of the committee, the rapporteur recognised that there is a rising number of women in the legal sector, and he found that the participation of women in political life has improved, and he also highlighted the inclusion of 4 women in ministerial positions within the current government. And finally, he talked about the significant changes in the family code, the criminal code, the national code, and the constitution.
L'Algérie a également ratifié la loi numéro 100 sur l'égalité de la rémunération entre hommes et femmes et la loi 111 portant sur la discrimination dans l'emploi et la profession. Aussi, la Convention 3 de 1999 sur la protection de la maternité qui prévoit l'interdiction de licenciement d'une femme enceinte ou en couche.
So Algeria also ratified the law number 100 on equal remuneration and the law number 111 on discrimination in employment and occupation. Algeria ratified also the 3rd Convention of 1993 on maternity protection that provides the prohibition of that forbids employers to fire pregnant women or women that just had a child.
Nous ne sommes pas là que pour parler de positif, nous sommes obligés d'en arriver aux lacunes, les lacunes qui subsistent malheureusement dans notre quotidien au milieu du travail. Donc beaucoup de progrès ont été accomplis dans ce sens pour faire de l'égalité entre l'homme et la femme au milieu du travail une réalité. Malheureusement, les femmes sont toujours confrontées à cette discrimination fondée sur le sexe dans toute la pratique de tous les jours au milieu du travail.
So, as you can imagine, we're not here to talk about the progress made, but rather we're here to emphasise the gaps that currently exist. And although much progress has been made to bring about real changes to the right of women to equality, to have this equality between men and women in the workplace, they're currently still faced every single day with gender discrimination, and this unfortunately is very much a daily practice.
Les lois sont là, mais les mécanismes pour les appliquer et pour les mettre en application sont vraiment précaires, voire inexistantes. Donc, surtout dans certains secteurs. C'est pour cela qu'au-delà de cette protection légale, il n'y a pas de mécanisme qui permette d'appliquer réellement cette égalité qui existe dans nos textes de loi. Par exemple, les modifications apportées au Code pénal en 2004 ont érigé en infraction le harcèlement sexuel au milieu du travail. Cette faute, qui est censée être beaucoup plus grave, malheureusement, est commise dans des endroits privés, sans témoins, qui restent difficilement à prouver. Et que lorsqu'une personne se plaint de ce genre de discrimination, elle est poursuivie parfois de diffamation et se transforme elle-même en victime. L'idéal, à mon avis, aurait été d'ériger le harcèlement sexuel non en infraction, mais en faute plus lourde, qui en rebuterait plus d'un.
So, as I've mentioned, the laws are there, but the current mechanisms in order to apply them and implement them are precarious at best, if not even non-existent in some sectors. And that is why, over and above legal protection, there's no actual mechanism for really implementing this principle. So, for example, the amendments to the criminal code that was seen in 2004 and the equality in these law texts to criminalise, for example, sexual harassment are just not enough. They don't go through with what they are supposed to do in practice because they don't describe the means of evidence that are supposed to be brought forward by the victim. Unfortunately, sexual harassment, which is obviously a very serious problem, is committed very often in private places such as offices, meaning that there are no witnesses, and it therefore remains very difficult to prove things because it's very often what happens is the victim goes to complain about what's happened to them. They end up either being transferred to another post or actually being sued for defamation, for having defamed the person who carries out the sexual harassment, and therefore that person is then seen as a victim rather than the actual victim.
Pour ce qui est de la participation de la femme à la vie politique et publique, les femmes ont le droit de voter depuis notre indépendance en 1962, érigeant le principe d'égalité comme concept constitutionnel réel. Mais pour le moment, ce n'est que virtuel, car difficile à mettre en œuvre. L'égalité en politique n'a pas été effective dans l'agenda des partis politiques, encore moins des institutions. En effet, le nombre de députées femmes a oscillé de 10 à 30, en descendant à 4 en l'année 84. Et ce n'est qu'en 2008, et sur impulsion du mouvement associatif, suite à un plaidoyer entrepris et donné au président de la République, que celui-ci propose l'amendement de sa constitution favorisant l'augmentation des chances politiques, des chances en politique pour les femmes.
So, with regards now to what should be best done so as to deal with this issue of the sexual harassment, from my point of view, it would have been to make sexual harassment in the workplace an indictable, serious offence. And now, if I'm going to go on to participation of women in both political and public life, women do have the right to vote and to stand for election. They've had that right since we gained our independence in 1962. Nevertheless, even though the adoption of the principle of equality is a constitutional concept, it remains solely a virtual one, as there are such difficulties in order to actually be able to play it out when it comes to its actual implementation. And equality policy has therefore not been effective in any of the agendas of the political party, and even less so on the part of the institutions. And so the number of women MPs has fluctuated between 10 and 30 before eventually dropping to 4 in 1984, and it then took until 2008 basically took the initiative of an associations movement following different advocacy work and lobbies that were carried out targeting the President of the Republic to propose the actual amendment of the Constitution that would therefore really encourage equal opportunities in politics for women.
Par la suite, il y a eu la loi en 2012 qui prévoyait un pourcentage de candidates dans les listes électorales par siège à pourvoir. De ce jour, elles ont été 143 à être élues au Parlement. Nous constatons une hausse dans la présence des femmes dans différents secteurs de la fonction publique, comme a été dit plus haut. Elles frôlent les 34% en santé, mais aussi police et gendarmerie. Le nombre de policières est arrivé aujourd'hui à 14 000 femmes, ce qui est une grande avancée pour un pays comme le nôtre. Malgré les chiffres parlants, la présence des femmes dans certains secteurs politiques, administratifs reste monopolisée par la gente masculine, malheureusement. Quant au recours à la discrimination positive, il a donné des résultats probants, mais il reste à renforcer au profit des femmes dans les postes à décision et à haute administration.
So from then on, what followed was the 2012 implementation of the organic law that actually, what it specified, what it was foreseen, was a percentage of candidates in electoral lists, women candidates that is per seat to be filled, and there were around 142 that were to be elected to Parliament. However, what we can see is this increase in the number of women in different sectors of public service area. It sort of oscillates around the 34% mark, both in health but also in police and in different other police forces that we have in Algeria. We don't just have the one police force. So today the number of police officers is actually more than women police officers, that is more than 1,400, which is obviously a real progress in a country such as ours. And although these figures do speak volumes, the presence of women in certain political and administrative sectors remains nonetheless monopolised by their male counterparts. As for the use of positive discrimination, this has produced some interesting results. However, it does need to be bolstered for the benefit of women, both in decision-making positions and in senior management, which are things that they currently are not being able to obtain.
Pour conclure, je dirais que la volonté politique existe réellement pour faire de l'égalité entre hommes et femmes une réalité, car des avancées significatives ces 10 dernières années ont eu lieu. Malheureusement, en dépit de toutes ces réformes politiques, entreprises, il reste du chemin, beaucoup de chemin à faire. Heureusement qu'avec l'aide des mouvements associatifs constitutifs de la société civile, qui sont partie prenante dans les changements entrepris, mais aussi à venir pour éliminer totalement la discrimination et rendre effective cette égalité entre hommes et femmes au milieu du travail. Je vous remercie.
So basically, in conclusion, what you can see is that a political will does really exist because it has contributed to a change in the reality in the past decades, and we have progressed significantly. Nevertheless, discrimination and inequality continue to exist, and this is in spite of certain political and legislative reforms that, as I've explained to you, have been undertaken in Algeria. So we obviously therefore do still have a really long way to go, and the movement of civil society associations is going to be involved not just in the changes that have been made up until now, but in the future changes that are going to be necessary in order to completely eliminate discrimination and actually arrive at a place where we do have effective equality between men and women in the workplace. Thank you very much for your attention.
I'd like to thank our panelists from Algeria for putting together such a comprehensive description of the reality in terms of formal equality and the differences between the formal equality and the ability to enforce the rights. And I know that our colleagues in Algeria are going to continue this major struggle. We are very happy that their associations are part of IADL. Our next speaker is Bronwen Handyside, who is the Vice Chair of Unite, London Eastern Region from 2012 to 2015. It's the biggest region in Unite, covering more than 310,000 workers from 20 different sectors in the public and private voluntary sectors, of which 39% are women. She was Chair and Vice Chair of the Unite London and Eastern Region Women's Committee from 2004 to 2015, and Chair of the London Area Activist Committee 2009 to 2015. She's been a trading and activist, shop steward, branch secretary, community organizer, internationalist, and socialist for over 35 years. Let's welcome Bronwen. Thank you. Just so you know, we have approximately another 40 minutes for this workshop, so we're on time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. I'm going to speak very briefly about women and work in the UK, and then I'm going to spend most of what I say, I'm going to be speaking about South Africa, and I'll explain why. And then I'll just say a little bit about Namibia at the end of my contribution. So, in the midst of the deepening inequality for the majority that austerity has produced throughout the world, it's no surprise to find that some workers still find themselves more unequal than others. In the UK, it's both women and black people who are super exploited through 0 hours contracts, involuntary part-time employment and self-employment. According to the TUC, the number of women in work is greater than ever before, but young women's employment, which fell furthest in the recession years, has still not recovered. However, most of the increase in women's employment has been in low-skilled and low-paying sectors. There's been a rise in the number of women on 0 hours and short hours contracts, unable to get enough work to make ends meet, and afraid to complain in case they lose the hours that they do have. There are more women in casual work with little or no security of employment. Pay in real terms has fallen for women, even though it hasn't fallen by as much as for men. Women working full-time now earn about 9% less per hour than men, but women working part-time earn nearly 38% less. They still make up the majority of those paid less than the living wage, and more women than ever before are in part-time work because they can't find full-time work. Over the period that women's self-employment has increased, earnings from self-employment have fallen in a bigger fall than the fall in real wages for employees following the recession. As a very quick overview of the position for women workers in the UK. But as I said when I started, I want to talk mostly about South Africa, where in an international context of gathering and deepening inequality, women suffer disproportionately, as do black people. In August 2014, I had the privilege of going on a Unite delegation to South Africa. We met with top representatives from the three constituent parts of the governmental tripartite alliance. This was the African National Congress, the ruling party, the Congress of South African Trade Unions, and the South African Communist Party. We also met with representatives from the National Union of Mine Workers, the National Union of Metal Workers, the Association of Mine Workers and Construction Union, and an array of NGOs and other politicians. The purpose of the delegation was to look into the background of the Marikana Miners Massacre of August 2012, when 34 miners on strike for a living wage were cut down by the South African police using automatic rifle fire, and many were shot in the back. Everyone we met on the delegation, including the African National Congress, acknowledged that the nature of South Africa's economy had not changed since the apartheid period. Foreign-owned companies, in particular the mining companies, continue to make super profits from the super exploitation of cheap black migrant labour. Their profits are not reinvested in the South African economy, and there is no effort or will from the government to make the mining companies carry out their long-agreed corporate social responsibilities. The South African National Union of Metal Workers explained to us how, soon after the democratically elected government came to power, it produced a 5-year economic program called GEAR, which focused on the introduction of the free market. The program included the relaxation of labour laws protecting workers, privatisation of public utilities, cuts to public services, and economic liberalisation, enabling companies like the mining companies to list on the London Stock Exchange. That meant they paid taxes in London and not in South Africa, which enabled them to expropriate an even greater proportion of the wealth rightfully belonging to the South African people. The ruling ANC has produced a new national development plan which includes no prospects of developing the manufacturing industry in a new South Africa which is rapidly deindustrialising. The plan is bitterly opposed by the unions, as the then General Secretary of COSATU, Zwelithini Vavi, explained to our delegation. Because there is no change in the economic structure, conditions for the black masses are deteriorating, and race and gender-based inequality is deepening. All of those we spoke to agreed that 20 years of a democratic government had not come anywhere near defeating the triple evils of unemployment, poverty and inequality. This, despite the fact that South Africa's economy is the second largest in Africa and the 28th largest in the world, and despite huge profits still being made by the mining companies. We were told about the level of unemployment, 35.6% when you took those too discouraged to seek work into account, and 40% among young people. The NGOs explained to us that South Africa is among the most unequal societies in the world. There is a divide by race. For example, 70% of management posts are held by whites, who are 10% of the population, and black women have the highest rate of unemployment and economic inactivity, and white men have the lowest. There is also an exponentially growing divide by class. The average CEO salary, for instance, is 1,720 times that of an ordinary worker. It was only in 2014, 20 years after liberation, that legislation was introduced for equal pay for women. This was in belated response to the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report, which showed that South African women earn about 50% less than their male counterparts doing the same work. Zwelithini Vavi, who was subsequently expelled as General Secretary of COSATU, mainly because he raised these issues, told us that the worsening poverty had brought huge problems, in particular to South Africa, like the brutal crime rate, including savage violence against women and girls. Thus, despite having their equal rights enshrined in the South African Constitution, South African women cannot equally participate in society and the world of work because of the horrifying rate of gender-based violence. The stark inequalities have created one of the highest rates of rape in the world, and this flows from, in the first instance, the wrenching away of migrant workers from traditional social structures and families to be dumped in huge all-male migrant hostels in poverty conditions. The combination of an economy managed solely on behalf of the extractive industries, with the vast bulk of profits repatriated outside of South Africa, together with the impact of the credit crash, has created mass unemployment and a lumpen layer abandoned in the townships with no stake in society. Women are disproportionately affected, suffering both from lack of work and from the effects on society of mass unemployment. The lower a South African woman's income, the more she will suffer from sexual harassment, violence and rape. But also, of course, the more pressing will be her need to find and keep work. The Metal Workers Union explained to the Unite delegation how the benefits of the democratic changes contained in the Freedom Charter, the program adopted by the South African workers' movement in its liberation struggle, are simply not available to the mass of black South Africans because of the poverty and inequality engendered by the lack of economic transformation. This applies even more to black women in South African society, whose position suffers from the triple oppression of gender, race and class. The South African government, as I explained earlier, consists of a tripartite alliance between the African National Congress, the General Trade Union Federation, COSATU, and the South African Communist Party. This structure has been hailed throughout the workers' movement as placing workers' organisations in the seat of government. However, there was general agreement among all those we met that the South African Communist Party and COSATU had been unable to exert any influence on the development of the GEAR economic plan, which opened the doors to the free market, nor the more recent National Development Plan, despite active and open opposition. The ANC's Joel Netsetsense revealingly said of the tripartite alliance, the working class has its demands, which it presents, but the ANC represents all classes. Its major aim is to win over those who are marginalised under apartheid and the apartheid exploiters in unity. Unfortunately, it seems to be the interests of the exploiters which are being prioritised by the ANC. I also spent some time in Namibia over the past year meeting men and women workers and found that almost identical conditions affect the workforce and women workers there as in South Africa. Foreign mines have been major employers over decades and have applied the same conditions to migrant workers as were imposed by the foreign-owned companies operating in South Africa. In many cases, they are the very same companies. They use the profits to enrich foreign stockholders rather than the Namibian people. Namibia's democratic revolution was led by SWAPO. In South Africa, the democratic revolution was led by the ANC. SWAPO was the party, was declared by the United Nations in 1972 to be the sole legitimate representative of the Namibian people. But in their path to power, SWAPO tortured and killed a whole generation of young militants, men and women who had joined it to fight the occupying South African forces. The same process took place when the ANC in exile outside of South Africa was flooded with young fighters who poured out of South Africa after the Soweto uprising and demanded to directly confront the South African army armed with their own weapons. The democratic revolutions which rid these two nations of apartheid failed to benefit the masses. The only change that has taken place has been the addition to a white ruling elite of a tiny black elite. Both act together as the agents of foreign exploitative companies. In Windhoek, when I was there, the capital of Namibia, I met with a group of women domestic workers who are fighting the government's forced imposition of a poverty rate of pay. They told me about the woman who wrote to them to say she lived in one room with her 4 daughters. She was HIV positive and her daughters had to turn to prostitution so that the family could survive. As in South Africa, the job prospects, working conditions and rights of black women workers remain at the very bottom of the heap. That's it.
Thank you, Bronwen, for that amazing amazing discussion of the realities on the ground, even in the post-apartheid South Africa, and the contradictions that exist that have to be overcome for people to fully gain economic and social justice. And our last speaker in this panel is our friend from the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, Nadja Charaby. And her bio is in the packet, but she's studied Southeast Asian Studies, Library Science, and Sociology at Humboldt University and Free University of Berlin. Over the last few years, she has worked and lived in Hanoi, Vietnam. She held the position of head of the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, regional representative for Southeast Asia from 2011 to 2015. During this period, she established partnerships and projects in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and Burma. Her work covered issues of social justice, socio-ecological transformation, and participatory politics. Since September 2015, Nadja has been advisor to the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation desk on global tasks and special funds with a special focus on climate projects. Nadja, thank you.
I have prepared a beautiful presentation. Can maybe somebody help me to find it? Yes, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would, of course, like to thank the organizers for inviting me and for giving me a chance to speak in this hall. Since I left university, I was actually wishing that I would never have to reappear in a hall like this one. But apparently it's interesting to stand at the other side and to try to give some speech. Women and work is the topic of the panel, and this is not really my specialty, but I'll try my best to entertain you with some interesting information. First of all, I would like to introduce the Luxemburg Foundation, which carries a quite fancy name, and you might be curious to know what that is. And secondly, I will give you kind of a snapshot of some projects that we are doing. So I will not focus so much on the analysis of a certain problem related to women in work or women at work, but maybe give you some hints of what you can do internationally in order to support, or not support, in order to partner in developing alternatives or overcoming certain situations which are not very progressive. I'm also not a native speaker in English, and I have not prepared a proper text, so apologies in advance if sometimes I may search certain words. So I think for Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, or Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, what you need to know is that it's a very specific German system we are standing in. It's a system that was established after the Nazi regime, that Germany, or the German government, decided that we need certain institutions that educate people towards democracy. So political foundations have the right to affiliate themselves with political parties, have the right to affiliate themselves with certain foundations. And these foundations receive state or public funding. Rosa Luxemburg Foundation is the youngest of these foundations, affiliated to the left party. And we heard the word socialism several times today, and I would also like to highlight that we are very, we feel ourselves committed to to socialism, but also to Marxist analysis, and this is something a bit missing nowadays in German politics and also in international politics. So we are working in Germany. That means we are providing social or political analysis of things that are happening nowadays. We are working on civic education, as I said. That means most of our events we are offering are for free. We are giving stipends to students and postgrads, and of course also working internationally. This is, I guess, the most difficult part for us, because if you are a left institution, or you perceive yourself as a leftist partner, and you want to be a partner of left movements all over the world, but you come from a very rich country with a lot of money, so how do you really fill these kind of partnerships with equal or like a same level partnership approach? So just for you to know that in the background of all our work internationally, this is always something that we are discussing, and that I think in general international cooperation or international development aid, I'm not using this term for us, is something that where we need this kind of discussions more openly, more aggressively, and more frequently. Just to give you a hint of, or as I said at the beginning, a snapshot of our projects, not only internationally, I want to introduce a project or a conference that has happened just recently. Because what we are observing in Germany is a tremendous downsizing of the social welfare state. I guess it's the same everywhere, but it's not that, because often when I travel abroad and you tell people you come from Germany, they're like, oh, it's rich, everything's beautiful, and you have this social market economy, so everything must be perfect. No, it is not. What we observed recently is tremendous downsizing of especially the care sector. It's privatized, it's kind of what we can say individualized, so people themselves have to take care of their relatives, children, parents, other relatives, and they have to look for how to do it just by themselves, or they have to buy private support. But we are wondering why is something just like the well-being of the elderly, the well-being of children, education, suddenly in the hand of each individual, where is the public, where is the state? So during the past 2 years, Germany was hit by strikes of kindergarten teachers, of health workers in hospitals, and it was a very interesting development because the union, but also patient movements and parents that were affected by the kindergartens being closed, they solidarized themselves with the strikers, with people being on strike. So we thought, as Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, this is a momentum for change. This is a momentum where you need to bring all these groups together. So there was organized this big conference. It's called Umkehr, which is a German word play that means change of perspectives. But it means to bring, like, let's say, people together that are active in the rights of patients, or that have initiated small medical health centers themselves, but bring them together with health workers from the big hospitals, with the unions and so on. And it was really a big success that these people who normally don't talk together or don't sit together and work out alternatives together now were brought to one place and really sat together in workshops and discuss options for the future. So this is just the initial status of this project, and we hope to develop this further on. Okay, in order to maybe move on a little bit internationally, what is also very important for us as Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung is, if you work internationally as a left partner, as a socialist organization, of course you should be sitting where the big decisions are made. This is the UN. And in general, I think, at least I myself, we as an organization do not really have like this one opinion towards the UN, but I'm very critical, because if you have lived and worked in the countries of the Global South, and have been in the communities, sometimes you feel like these UN speeches and beautiful charters and decisions, they are just made up in the air, but what is really getting through to the people is a very different story. So what our office in New York is trying is like really to bring indigenous women to the UN and bring them together with very experienced activists so that they can learn to speak the language of the UN, to address their issues at the UN via our status, but also to bring back the experiences of the UN when they have been there back to their local level, so that they become, I don't know, it's a very, like, not change makers, but that they become activists, or that they can tell their communities what they have experienced, and that this kind of helps to educate multiplicators. And another project, moving away from the international or like global level, is local level. For example, in the work that I have done in Southeast Asia and Vietnam, one of the projects, originally I felt, what does this have to do with us? A partner organization approached us and was saying, we need to do something on domestic workers. You know, Vietnam is a socialist republic, so you think naturally every worker must be protected. But then if you look deeper, of course there's a huge informal sector. Nobody talks about it. And this informal sector is not only the suppliers that supply the big industrial zones. You may have heard about these sweatshops in Vietnam, so I will not elaborate this further, but there is kind of an infrastructure of domestic workers, internal migrants, usually women, from the countryside that move to the cities and take care of children, parents, shopping, cleaning, and what's so on, of a newly developing middle class. These women usually do not really have a status. It's very difficult to get permit to really stay in the city. So often they live on a like semi-legalized status. They do not have a union. They usually do not have contracts. And often they're even living with the families, right? These are young girls, 14, 15, 16 years old, moving to the city through some channels which are very unclear. Sometimes it's relatives, very far relatives, sometimes it's someone in the village who knows someone in the city, or sometimes it's even professional agencies. But the border, or the point where it's crossing the line to trafficking, is very edgy. So our partner was saying, what we need to do is we need to convince political decision makers that domestic workers need a place in the labor code. Of course, you are lawyers. Sorry, I'm not a lawyer, but as a lawyer you will understand much better than I do why it's so important that domestic workers are represented somewhere in legal documents. So they were lobbying the National Assembly, and successfully in 2012, domestic workers became part of the labor code. But of course, in a system, I guess it's the same everywhere. Laws are beautiful. We heard that from Algeria. Laws are beautiful on paper, but what happens in reality later on is, of course, the question. Who is monitoring enforcement? Who gives people information that they have these rights now? And who works with, for example, the employers, that they even allow the workers who are very exposed to their own will, that they can, let's say, talk to other women and so on. So our partner said, by just working on the law, it's just one part, but the second part needs to be working with the employers, raising their awareness, initiating women's clubs at the women's union, where domestic workers in their free time can work and learn about their rights, and thirdly also create pressure via media reports and so on. In a system like Vietnam, it's not very easy because media is quite state-controlled, but if you have kind of the support of, let's say, for example, the National Assembly or some like mass organizations, you can reach certain journalists and change the reporting in the media. And one last project I also want to introduce to you is about Cambodian garment workers. I have been quite involved with this project in 2013 and 2014. I don't know if the news about the strikes in Cambodia probably have gotten through to the UK as well. And they were asking for a minimum wage, I think of $160. In 2013, I think they were earning $80. Even the Cambodian government itself admitted that it should be $160 a month. But the women had to go on strike, or garment workers had to go on strike, and these strikes were, or these demonstrations were hit by quite some state violence, and a lot of my friends and activists in Cambodia, they were arrested. However, if you work in such a context, of course it's always a difficult decision to make if you can still support these activities if your partners are always under the risk of being maybe arrested and so on. But as Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, we would try to make the partners make their own decision, and we support them the best way we can, like, for example, via pressuring the embassy and so on. So we found one organization approached us, and they said, you always hear the story about the really bad working conditions in the manufactories and low wage. But another problem is really how workers have to live, how they have to commute to work. Like they have to work night shifts, they are not paid. were cases of mass fainting in the manufactories. And all these stories were not known to anyone. But it was also very difficult for journalists or activists to get in and to get the information. So they decided to equip 10 garment workers, women, with mobile phones, and they trained them on filming, on telling the story via Facebook, via Twitter, and but out of this they also produced some movies. The links are here. Maybe later on Haldane Society can send you these movies or these YouTube links. They are in Khmer, but you find some English subtitles, so you will also understand. And I think this project was really successful because it got a lot of attention, especially amongst other garment workers. And I just read the news that recently at least the minimum wage was lifted up to $140, but it was a long struggle, and of course the struggle isn't over. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Nadja. I think we've covered the globe in many ways in terms of women at work. Just as a little bit of an aside in terms of the U.S., the attacks on labor unions, the attacks on workers' rights have been relentless, and I think now the number of private sector workers who are in unions in the United States is lower than it was in 1916, which is before the Wagner Act, which is the law that allowed organizing the public sectors around, I don't know, 20%. Between the two, the unionization rate in the United States is about 11% to 12%. It's very, very low at this point. And this is among the reasons why you see this upward transition of wealth into fewer and fewer hands, and the kinds of ways in which the market has attempted to really crack down so much on labor, forcing people into being trafficked, forcing people to survive using these kinds of mechanisms and impacts on women that we've heard about in this conference. If there are any, I think we have about 5 minutes before the closing session begins. Are there any questions or any comments that, do we have any microphones? Yeah. Are there any questions or comments from any of the panelists? Anyone? I know it's late. We got the position of speaking after Angela Davis, who of course was wonderful. We have some questions. Here we go.
Hi, this is a question for Nadja, and I thought it was very interesting, the project that you have empowering Indigenous women to approach the UN, but in their own capacity instead of indirectly with someone else representing them, which we often see. And I just would like to know more about the fruits of this project.
You know, our office wasn't open so long ago, so I think it's happened twice so far. And I think the fruits of this project, it's difficult for me to talk about it as I haven't been involved directly, but I think we will be able to tell the story maybe in a few years, if you could ask me this question just later. But it's just, I think what is good is, I don't want to advertise our organization too much, but usually we try to be very close in the selection also, because you have, it's sometimes in local levels you have quite tensions, relationships between certain groups, and then you invite one, but then the others are offended, and so on. So we really try to accompany these women very early, but also afterwards, after they have been at the UN. So I'm sure that if you ask me this question in 2 or 3 years, there can be told the story about some outcome.
Well, thank you first of all for a really interesting panel session. Just questions or comments about the roles of unions vis-à-vis undocumented migrants, and particularly migrants working, for example, in domestic care, that are quite isolated. Where do you see that? And whether there is, I don't know if the British unions are doing much about
that. I can tell you that even though I haven't spoken about it here, I did speak about it in the workshops. I work very closely with undocumented worker organizations, and we have found that the unions that used to take positions that were not necessarily in their interest, and thinking that undocumented workers were their enemies, are now seeking out actively to try to organize undocumented workers in a number of places. I think that's also true in the UK. It's not easy because, at least in the United States and in a lot of places, if someone is discovered as an undocumented worker, they are subject to various penalties. And although in reality the laws are supposed to cover documented and undocumented workers equally in terms of the remedies they have, they're not equal at all.
Je peux répondre à la question? Okay. Bon, dans la loi algérienne, les femmes migrantes, elles ne sont pas protégées. Elles ne sont pas protégées dans ce sens-là. Elles n'ont aucun droit, aucune loi, malheureusement. Même si je vous donne un exemple, par exemple, un étranger, quand il travaille en Algérie, il faut que l'employeur lui fasse un permis de travail. Sinon, l'employeur sera puni dans ce sens-là. Et vice-versa, la traductrice là. Et vice-versa, si on prend une femme migrante, elle ne peut pas travailler en Algérie, puisque la loi elle ne la protège pas dans ce sens. Ça, c'est une sorte de... Ça, c'est comme l'a dit ma collègue avant, ça, c'est un point, comment dirais-je, c'est une carence, voilà, dans la législation algérienne.
So I just wanted to intervene by saying that migrant workers are not protected in that sense. In fact, they have no rights. If as a foreigner you come to work in Algeria, you need an employer to take out a work permit on your behalf, and if they do not do so, then they will be subject to certain sanctions, and vice versa. So basically, a female migrant worker can't come and work in Algeria, because if they do, the law just doesn't protect that woman. In that sense, there's no existing legislation. It's like what my colleague here said before me, that's a current loophole, it's a current gap in our legislation.
Just to add briefly that Unite doesn't investigate anybody's immigration papers as we organise them, and there's a lot of migrant workers and overseas workers involved, in particular in the social care area, and also in cleaning and amongst hotel workers. But our policy has always been just simply to organise workers so that they can fight for their rights in the working context. We don't ask to see anybody's papers at any point.
I also would like to add something to that point, because like for example in Vietnam, where you have like this one union, it's a centralized one-party state. So of course for this system, how to deal with like informal workers, for example, or migrant workers is like, they have internal migration, domestic migration, but this is like really a challenge, and I hope that, for example, the Vietnamese trade union will open up sometime to allow these workers to come in. On the other hand, they have other mass organizations, like the Women's Union. In Cuba, you have that as well. They, for example, take care then of domestic workers, but it's not necessarily the most progressive organization. But for example, in Cambodia, I was impressed by this activism of like informal sector unions. For example, tuk-tuk drivers, I guess who has been to Asia knows tuk-tuks. If they go on strike, the whole city is just shut down. So they are very powerful. Or like these street vendors also. They are very powerful. Just to add.
When you want to. Well, I think, if there are any other questions, we're going to, yes, okay.
One quick question. Hello, I enjoyed the panel immensely. I'm a barrister, and about 50% of my practice is in employment and discrimination law. One of the things that especially to the Algerian lawyers, but to all members of the panel, you spoke a lot about discrimination measures in employment law in Algeria. I was wondering about how successful not just women but all workers are in making those rights a reality. In the UK it's increasingly difficult now with the introduction of appalling tribunal fees that mean that people, even when they know their rights, are unable to access a tribunal, and legal aid has been decimated in respect of employment law. I was wondering whether those same kind of challenges exist in Algeria, and also to the whole panel, if you have any ideas for how people can make their rights a reality in circumstances where they're facing quite a hostile environment in terms of accessing a tribunal.
Je vais répondre à votre question. Ce qui est bizarre et paradoxal, contrairement aux idées reçues que nous pouvons avoir, en Algérie, la femme, au milieu du travail, bizarrement, encore une fois, trouve beaucoup plus facilement de travail et plus facilement acceptée. Au milieu du droit, par exemple, on est beaucoup plus nombreuses à être des femmes avocates que des hommes. Et nous arrivons avec beaucoup de facilité à exercer ce métier. Je dirais que peut-être un des rares pays à appliquer la discrimination positive est l'Algérie. Les hommes se plaignent, et pour une fois que ce sont les hommes qui se plaignent, les hommes se plaignent que les femmes trouvent et accèdent plus facilement à des postes de travail. Malheureusement, il reste quelques points à traiter, tels que l'application réelle dans certains secteurs qui sont malheureusement pris et enfermés dans un cadre très masculin. Voilà.
So, in answer to your question, there is actually a weird sort of paradoxical reality in Algeria, which is quite like the ideal that we would like to see, whereby women in terms of the workplace find it so much easier to find work and are so much more accepted in the field of law. In fact, there's even more women lawyers than there are male in our country. It's just very easy for some reason to be able to practice law and to get into law. And let's just say that it's perhaps the fruit of positive discrimination, where it has actually worked, and for once men are the people complaining. They complain that women find it a lot easier to get into work in law and find it a lot easier to be accepted for posts. But I'd say that that is very specific to the sector of law, and there are many other sectors that are very much dominated by men where the opposite exists.
Je peux rajouter une chose? Je veux rajouter une chose. Oui. Je veux rajouter une chose, que c'est vrai, si on est là, c'était pas un chemin très facile pour nous. C'était toute une guerre, si je peux dire, c'était un vrai combat pour nous, les femmes algériennes. Puisque l'Algérie, si vous le savez, Elle a vécu 32 ans, 132 ans de colonialisme. Ensuite, 10 ans de terrorisme. On a vécu 10 ans de terrorisme. Si je parle de mon secteur, en tant qu'avocate, auparavant, période de terrorisme, la femme algérienne ne pouvait pas sortir comme ça et aller au tribunal pour exercer son travail. Elle était tellement dure, puisque à cause du terrorisme qu'on a vécu en Algérie, c'était pas aussi facile. Et justement, si on est là, c'est vraiment qu'on a lutté pour y arriver. C'était pas aussi facile, mais c'était tout un chemin à tracer pour y arriver. Heureusement qu'on est jeunes, mais nos parents ont vécu ça. Et ce qui est fait, c'était pas aussi facile.
Sorry, I just wanted to add something to what my colleagues just said. I don't want to get the wrong impression here. I just want you to know that if it is a fact that we've arrived at this situation where there are a lot of women lawyers in Algeria, I want to say that it's not been a very easy path to tread, and we have had to fight and struggle the whole way. I would just like to point out that Algerian women have had to put up with and live through very hard times. First off, we've gone through 132 years of colonialism and then 10 years of terrorism. And in my sector, in the field of law, during those years of terrorism, the 10 years that we experienced terrorism in our country, it's not like women could just go out and go to the courts and work. Because of the terrorism that we were experiencing in Algeria, we just couldn't do that. So if we're currently in this position, it's because we fought to get here. It's the fruit of a whole struggle. And happily, we're young, but our parents had to go through all of that before us. So I just want to point out that it wasn't like, it's not like totally easy. But that's the result that we've happily achieved.
That direct question about what the unions, how the unions are addressing the problem of the fact that we now have to pay a fee to go to tribunal on a whole range of issues. In Unite, we've taken a very simple approach, and if we think our members got a good case, then we pay for them to go to tribunal.
Sorry, we're just going to go on to a closing speech now. I'm sorry to interrupt the panel. I'm a bit conscious again that the interpreters are going to go home, but they've kindly said that they would stay for a bit longer today. So Jeannie Mirror, who's just been chairing, is going to close the session today. And then I just want to say that Hadjer has done much of the organisation for this conference, but really it's a joint venture between IADL and Hadjer and ELDH as well, so the three partner organisations. So, and we're very grateful to Jeannie for all the work she's done as well. So I'm going to pass over to her.